although they were carrying on with our investigating the British stronghold in Zimbabwe. So you see, parties like ZANU-PF, when they do things, they report to the British. Even when they did the coup, they reported to the British and the Chinese. But I'm talking about the British now. Look at the African Union. They report to the European Union. So what we're seeing in Africa, we're seeing a group of men who are actually serving the interests of the oppressors. That is why 1.4 billion people of Africa are not developed, because we are not led. Africa, we are not led. Okay, I'm not just talking about Zimbabwe alone. Now I'm talking about the whole continent. We are not led. All these so-called African leaders, they're not leading for our interests as African people. They're leading for the interests of the Europeans. And you will see them once in a while coming up against the Europeans, like being trying to act like they've got some kind of bravado of some sort. But in actual fact, they are the European stooges. That is why I spoke yesterday about African countries that are crying for beneficiation. And I'm asking myself, why are they crying for, for beneficiation from foreign countries? Foreign companies. Why can't they set their own companies? Because they are not allowed to. People by their masters. They're not allowed to. Yoweri Museveni was making noise saying that foreign countries are not beneficiating in Uganda. What is stopping Yoweri Museveni for starting companies that will beneficiate in this country? Do you know what's stopping them? It's their masters, because their masters tell them what to do. They tell them to keep Africa in poverty. So if ever we want to liberate Africa, what we do in Africa should have absolutely nothing to do with Britain. We don't answer to them. We don't tell them what we're doing. We don't. We are not. We shouldn't even question us. When they question us, we just keep quiet. It's got nothing to do with them. Freedom is when you do things your own way. Grab your own country by the balls. Grab your own continent by the balls. I'm beginning to see that this actually is a liberation movement that must take a stronghold in the rest of Africa. Because if Zimbabwe is free and other African countries are not free, these stooges, these African leaders, so-called African leaders, who are actually working for the European Union, will make it difficult for Zimbabwe to succeed. So we need a whole African spring, our own version of an Arab spring. We need an African spring to super across the whole region. The whole goddamn region must be free. The whole continent will need to be free, and countries must lead uh, and create their own policies that and they've got nothing to do with Britain. Okay, we should not be answerable to Britain. You see what France does in West Africa, in Francophone countries. Those countries don't even have their own currency. They bank in France and they are heavily taxed. And France, being the ones who are running the central banks of Francophone countries, is not even alleviating poverty in these countries or even reducing unemployment as a central bank should do. They are not, because their mission is to keep Africa impoverished, and the British as well are busy this side in these Anglophone countries doing exactly the same thing. And I told you in the previous video that the Lord opened my eyes and showed me something about Gugurahundi. That Gugurahundi was actually British sanctioned, British sponsored, but they hid behind North Korea. Because if you all say North Korea did it, so what we all know that North Korea is a bad guy, so everybody blames North Korea for everything. But it's not North Korea; it's Britain who did Gugurahundi, and God revealed to me why Britain did Gugurahundi. The reason why they did it is because they remember when they took Zimbabwe. They took it for the Ndebeles, from King Lopengula. Remember, they came in Fort Tule. They went again to 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 to, to Fort Victoria, which is now Maswingo. And they were strategizing on how to take over Matabeleland, because Bulawayo Matabeleland was the seat of power in the whole country. And so they also went to Salisbury, currently Harare, further away from the seat of power to strategize on how they can encircle the country. And then eventually they did encircle the country, even via through Botswana, because Botswana was a British a protectorate, so they had Lopengula surrounded. So Lopengula did not lose the country because of selling the country for sugar. No, it was a war. He was defeated in the war. Okay, so it was the Ndebele state that was defeated. The Mzilika's state which was defeated. So when Kaboko Joshua Mkomo rises again on behalf of that state, the British recognize that, and therefore they go for the weaker part, which is Robert Mugabe was the weaker one who was willing to carry on British hegemony in Zimbabwe in exchange for power. So because of power hunger, Robert Mugabe and his ZANU people, they took power instead of doing what Nkom wanted to be done, which is take the land and bring the resources into the hands of black people. Robert Mugabe kept the economy in the hands of white people as per their agreement. And in order to make sure that there is a destruction of that whole idea of freedom in Zimbabwe, the British needed to destroy that seat of power, which is Bulawayo, Matebele land. Because you see, these days, if you're a Zimbabwean and you look at Zimbabwe now, you're told that the capital city is Harare, and therefore you think it has always been like that forever, and it hasn't been. It's just only recent that Harare became a capital city. In reality, this country, the country of Zimbabwe, was I mean, was led before the British came, was led from Bulawayo by King Lopengula, by King Mzilikazi. And that is where the British took it away from them. So the British do not have a concept of Souls or Harare or even Shona people as leaders of the country. I know Shona people might not understand or agree. It's not an attack on Shona people or whatever, but it's just history, it's reality. So the British do not have a concept, or did not have even in the 70s, a concept of the Shona people being the source of resistance. No, they were actually the ones that were subdued by the Ndebeles, because the country was run by the Ndebeles, including running even the Shonas. So as far as the British mind were concerned, the Shonas were the weaker ones and the Ndebeles were the stronger ones. And indeed, they were the stronger ones because Joshua Mkabe Nkoma rose from there. But however, Joshua Mkabe was a nationalist. He was not a tribalist. His movement was national. It was comprising of both Ndebele people or tribes that are subscribed to the Ndebele state, and Shona people and the affiliated tribes. He had this nationalistic view, and so the British were threatened by that. So as they were handing over power, wait, I'm busy. So what happened is that so Robert Mugabe, being the weaker one, agreed to the lie of the British. Say, we give you power and you will keep the economy in our hands and you become our stooge. Robert Mugabe agreed. So in the early 1980s, the British needed to make sure that they finish off their enemy, which is the Ndebele state, which was led by Joshua Mqabe Wonkom. Remember, I told you that the British took the country from the Ndebele state, not from the Shona state. And I want you to be very careful so that you don't argue over useless things. This is not this is an attack on Shona people or anything. It's a historical fact. I just need you to understand why we are here, where we are, and how we can move forward. And understand that Gugurahundi, actually, in fact, I want to exonerate Shona people from Gugurahundi. Gugurahundi was not done by the Shona people. Gugurahundi was done by Britain. Okay, in the use of the using the weaker ones, the weaker links amongst us, which was Robert Mugabe. And today, Emerson Mnangagwa and General Chiwenga are now lead president and vice president. Those were the weaker links. Okay, we need to forgive them too, but because they were the weaker links during those days, and they thought that they were gonna be successful, they were gonna get power. Well, they did get the power, and now they have all the power. So what happened is that uh so this guy he gets into power, and the British have to destroy the Ndebele state. And what's best way to do it than to brand them as dissidents who want to take over power from the government? And even if they were dissidents, would you blame them after seeing that you spent the 60s and the 70s fighting these British in order to take the power into the hands of black people. And then the British come and look for the weak amongst you and take over your revolution and gave it to Robert Mugabe, who does not carry on with a land reform program or any program that puts the economy in the hands of of black people. So if you're Joshua Mkabu come and you spent your whole life fighting for your people's liberation, and your people's liberation has been stolen by the white oppressors and they gave it to Robert Mugabe, who do not rebel. Actually, it's not even a rebellion, it's a continuation of the fight for liberation. So Robert Mugabe might have branded them as dissidents ngokwakhe lokho indlela yakabranda ngakhona, but Robert Mugabe was a sellout. Emerson Mnangagwa and Chiwenga were sellouts, and right now the country is led by the two sellouts, British stooges, which we really need to have a national discussion on what we must do with them. I no longer want to tell you Zimbabweans what you must do with these people, but I'm telling you what it is. You yourself go to your wives and your husbands and your families and decide. You see, here's the thing. When it comes to Shona people and Shona and Ndebele relations, we need to be very careful here because the intention of the British people is to bring a wedge between Ndebeles and the Shonas, so that the Ndebeles will blame the Shonas for Gugurahundi, and then the Shonas will say, "Oh well, the Ndebeles were dissidents." I want you to be clever like snakes, and understand that division is what the enemy wants to achieve. So in reality, I told you that we've always been united. In the 60s and 70s, when Joshua Mkabi Nkomo was leading the revolution, according to my understanding, he was actually one of the most popular liberating. He was not one of the, he was the most popular liberator in Mashonaland. Joshua Mkabi Nkomo was leading Shona people to liberate Zimbabwe. So it's not a matter of tribe. It's the tribal issue was brought in by the British intelligence for the safe purposes of destroying our people. So both tribes, the Ndebeles and the Shonas, who were led by Joshua Mkabi Nkomo, who so happened to be in Ndebele, were working towards liberating the country. And then Robert Mugabe, who so happens to be Shona, but it's got nothing to do with Shona people, but it just so happened that that is his tribe. And General Chiwenga and Emerson Mnangagwa were part of the weaker group that allowed the British to use them. So they got used by the British. Mugabe akashandiswa nama-British. But whether he was fully aware or half-heartedly aware, I do not know. But all we know that they were used by the British. And even during Gugurahundi, whether they fully got engaged knowing what the British are doing or not, we do not know. But they did Gugurahundi. I know the mindset of the British, but we can debate about the mind of Robert Mugabe and Emerson Mnangagwa, on what basis were they carrying out Gugurahundi. Did they truly understand that the British are using them, and they were willing, or they were also made to believe that these people are dissidents? And even if they were dissidents, I would argue that even if they were dissidents, they were all right to be dissidents. Because after all, the real dissident is Robert Mugabe, because he deserted the liberation struggle and began to form a band of people that are aligned with the British in order to keep the prosperity of our nation in the hands of Britain. That's why we still have a British hegemony in Zimbabwe, British hegemony across Anglo-Saxon, English speaking countries. And we need to challenge that as the emerging leaders in Zimbabwe. We need to challenge that notion that everything that we do, we need to adhere to British norms, British standard, so-called democracy or rule of law or whatever it is. The democracy and the rule of law ensures that their stooges are in power. So we must interrogate deeply this so-called democracy, human rights. See, they sound good on paper, but you will discover that they are actually meant to keep the people that oppress us in power. So, as Zimbabweans, if we want to force our way forward, we need to come together and do something that is uniquely ours. Whether we're Democrats or autocrats or whatever, crats, it's got nothing to do with the British. It's none of their business. They cannot tell us what to do. It's our community. So if you are a community, you come together as a community, you decide what to do, as a community. As far as Itim Nangagwa and the vice president are concerned, I would recommend Zimbabweans that the best thing to do in a colossal sin like this one is not to touch them. Let God deal with Emerson Mnangagwa and Chiwenga. As far as we're concerned, I would recommend that we forgive them and let them go and retire in the farms. Don't arrest them. Do not do any harm to them. Let them be. These are old men they are going to be dying soon anyway because of old age. They are heavily laden by too many sins that they've got enough sins already. Just leave it to Jehovah. Okay, there is no help in being vindictive. And as far as the relations with the Ndeviles and the Shonas, I told you already that you were always been a united people. And if you want to succeed and go forward, you're going to go back to the 1970s where Joshua Mkabugo was a leader of all the tribes and he was leading Zimbabwe towards true liberation, taking our farms, taking our economy. And remember, I spoke about taking farms. We need to educate our people on farming and aid them through grants and all sorts of other things so that we can become able to deliver an economy, not just an agrarian economy. Agrarian economy is important for food security, but we need a modern economy that will take part in the fourth industrial revolution and in artificial intelligence and all the other things and all the other technologies that the world is dealing with right now. Therefore, we need a center that is holding a government that is strong. My name is Ngobani Zondo, and I am willing to lead that government. Always God. Have a great evening.